Welcome to MedHeads, the weekly show that brings a biopsychosocial focus to issues of the day, along with special guests who will showcase their expertise and enthusiasm about their field of practice. Your host, Dr. Fergal Armstrong.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong and welcome to MedHeads. Today we have our regular guest, Chrissie. How are you?
Thank you, Fergal. How are you?
I'm good. So the last episode, we talked about your vulnerabilities to alcohol. And today I'd like to talk about your first drink and what it meant for you. How do you feel about that?
My first drink. I remember it really clearly. I was living in Brisbane. I was 14 years old, and my auntie threw a party for one of my cousins who was probably turning 18. And looking back, my auntie was quite a chronic alcoholic. I didn't realise that at the time, but she threw a party, and I brought along a 375ml of Bundaberg rum, which is what you drink in Brisbane. And I remember she and my cousin saying that you need to mix that with Coca-Cola. And I do have a clear memory of saying thank you for your concern, but I'll be fine. And I really wanted to experience, I guess, drinking this substance without it being watered down, having no idea exactly what it did or what it might do, but predicting that it was going to take me somewhere other than where it was.
You'd never had an alcoholic drink ever before?
Never touched it.
Never touched it. And what made you decide that that was the time that you were going to touch it for the first time?
Look, I think probably just opportunity. I was 14, so I've got a 13-year-old daughter, and, she's not going to be drinking at the age of 14 in our house, I can assure you. So, It was probably opportunity. Having a place where I could obviously, had access to it, wasn't going to be really monitored too much, and wanting to, I guess, just fit in with, the crowd would have been older, my cousins were older, and I think, I would say opportunity knocked.
Right. But you seem to have made that decision that it was going to be Bundaberg and it was going to be 375 mils of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not just like a sip. And it wasn't going to be mixed with Coke. It wasn't going to be a sip of Coke and rum.
No.
It was going to be neat. I mean, that to me is interesting. Any ideas why you went through that thinking?
Maybe I'd seen it. Maybe I did know that. I had never experienced the effects of alcohol, but I imagine I would have, seen movies or watched television shows where people would have been inebriated. I knew that. And I'd watched my mum drink. She's not an alcoholic, but I'd watched her drink lots. Like, she used to carry around the cardboard handbag, the old cask of wine. So, so I knew that it had an effect on people, and probably for a lot of people, quite a jovial, happy, good time effect. Unfortunately, that just wasn't the case for me. But so I knew that alcohol changed people's state of mind, I suppose, or changed their reality. I don't know if that was sort of, a learned thing or innate or, but I knew that it was going to do something, just wasn't sure exactly what. And I was desperately wanting not just to have fun, but to feel some sort of sense of hope or happiness or, I can't really describe it. I just knew that I didn't want to be in this head that was so busy and so just these really, really self-deprecating thoughts. They were really difficult to cope with all day, every day. It was just this constant barrage of, like, you're not good enough, you're crap, like, you're, I can't believe you did that, Chrissie, or you're so embarrassing, or gosh, you're cringeable, or what an idiot, just absolute barrage. And I hoped that it would quieten that voice, and it did.
So tell me what happened to you in your first encounter with alcohol.
So my first encounter, I drank it straight. I remember it burning my throat. So I would have a glass of water. I didn't know that that actually would water it down, but that would like cool my throat. And then I'd just drink, like scull another glass. I hated the flavour. I remember like almost gagging on it, but I didn't drink for the taste. I drank for the effect. And I remember wearing like 18-hole Doc Martens and looking down at these Doc Martens because I always tried to have some sort of image. These particular cousins were kind of, skinheads, so I tried to fit in and I got the shoes and what have you. Anyway, and I remember looking down at these boots and the whole world just starting to spin, and I probably fell backwards off I don't know. And I woke up the next morning and I literally thought that was awesome. Like,
Really?
I don't.
So you didn't have a hangover? You didn't get sick?
I did not have a hangover at all. I got sick that night,
Do you remember
apparently.
that?
No, I don't. I don't remember that at all. So I blacked out the very first time I ever drank. And, um, you know, interestingly, throughout my entire teens, I could never, I've said in the past, I could never sort of predict how much I was going to drink. It was always too much. So in my teens, I would find that I'd end up overshooting the mark and probably being sick that night, which is a bit gross, but that was the reality. And then by my 20s, I used to be able to hold it down for, whatever, 12, 14 hours. I'd go for really long stretches of drinking, but then I'd spend 12 hours the next day being incredibly ill and being sick and just couldn't move. And then by my 30s, I didn't throw up at all. And I thought finally I'd adjusted, like I'd matured.
You've got this.
I've got this. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nailed it.
Yeah. So you had this pattern of drinking, of always overshooting the mark, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Why was that, do you reckon?
Look, at the time I would have told you that I just liked to have a good time, and like to have fun. And I know that that's not a lot of people's idea of fun, but in the end, I probably just so desperate for any identity that maybe I just took that on as like, well, that's who I am. I mean, people didn't know me as being a very big drinker, and when it was a bit more socially acceptable when I was younger, that was kind of fun. That was my, I wore it a bit as a label or a badge or just some identity to grab onto, which is sadly enough, that's the one I.
So what identity did that give you? Did it give you the identity of being an alcoholic or a drunk? Or was it cool?
Yeah, definitely it was towards the cooler side. I called myself an alcoholic for a long time. My mum called me an alcoholic from maybe age 15 or 16. So, but of course, I didn't think I really was. I thought that she was just wanting me to stop drinking or, but yeah, she said that I drank the way that my dad drank, and she said I drank in a, even more frightening manner than my dad. So yeah, I didn't like, in the end, like as in 20s, 30s, that kind of thing, when I'd get like a lot of heat from other people about stopping drinking, or that you drink too much. In the end, I was quite open, and said, yeah, I know I'm an alcoholic. In order to essentially shut them up. I didn't want to have to talk about it anymore. If I admit that I'm an alcoholic, then maybe there's nowhere to go, unless I want to make a change. Whereas I think I found when I argued the point, we just, it just felt like an attack. So I'd surrender and just go, yep, I am. But deep down, I didn't think I was. I thought, I didn't know what an alcoholic was actually. So yeah, sorry, going back to your point, the reason now, I think, with a bit more, I guess, knowledge around the situation and a bit more, when I say education, it's not education of the university variety, but it's education of, people who've gone before me. I know now that that I have a different physiological reaction to alcohol. So and I'm very, very open and happy to admit that it's the first drink, the first sip that gets me drunk, not because I can't stop. It's not the 30th drink. So for me, that's why abstinence is an absolute must.
So one's too many and 100's not enough.
Yeah,
So at
absolutely.
what age were you when you started developing hangovers?
Um, oh, that's a good question. Like I used to go out on a Thursday night when I was in year 12 because I had fake ID, and I'd turn up to exams after a big night, and I'd actually do, I don't know how, I'm not kidding, but I'd do pretty well in the exams. So I don't think I used to get hangovers then. I would say, um, late teens, early 20s.
Right. And at what age were you when you started drinking every day?
Every day.
Hmm.
That was quite a bit later, to be
Hmm.
honest. Like, that wouldn't have been, oh gosh, until my late 20s, if not
Yeah.
30s. Yeah,
Yeah.
possibly even 30s.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So your first drink started at 14 and you took to that like a duck to water.
Mm.
And you continued binge drinking and then that transformed into daily drinking in your 30s. For you to have enjoyed that and gone, wow, and for you to have continued binge drinking, there must have been a reward for you. And we've touched on the first idea of the reward, that it gave you the identity of being a cool, and then you accepted the label of alcoholic initially as a joke. There must have been other rewards though. What else did it do for you that kind of that perpetuated your binge drinking at that time?
I think, honestly, um, I used to get this feeling around about the third drink in, give or take, where I could just sigh relief and just stop worrying.
Mm.
I really was a worrier. It was, as I said before, tiring up in this head of mine. You
Mm.
know, I'd harbor a lot of sort of guilt and shame and remorse, and just from either the previous drinking session or the previous years, or I'd look at opportunities missed, or I'd look at the way I might have treated somebody, and it was a way of escaping having to deal with those thoughts, or the cringeworthy acts, or I really feel it was just an escape from. There was also a sadness. There was, I spoke of it, this sort of hole in the soul. There really was a spiritual sickness. There was just a real sadness that I can't put into words. That I honestly feel that I was feeling when I filled it with alcohol and occasionally substances, whatever it was. I didn't have to worry about. I didn't have to think about the sadness. I mean, I'm generally, believe it or not, and certainly now, like a pretty feel good, positive, happy person. I don't want to look back on my life and sit in the kind of negativity and the morbid thoughts that I used to sit in. It was sad. I really didn't
Mm.
enjoy it. So my drinking took me away from that. It definitely psychologically took me out of where I'd been, and I was really shy. Really, I didn't think for a moment that I was remotely interesting enough without alcohol. Um, you know, I guess if I look back on it, when I came out of childhood with mum, with moving away, and then wanting to go and live with dad, and dad not wanting a bar of us, and all this sort of stuff, I started to tell myself that, and it makes sense now as an adult, but I would have told myself that I'm not likable or lovable enough as is. So I have to change. I have to improve. I have to be a better version of me, because whoever I am at the moment is not lovable.
Yeah.
And yeah, alcohol, I think for a long time made me feel like, yeah, that I was, or if I wasn't, that I didn't care. Yeah.
So really, this underlying vulnerability that we've talked about in the previous episodes created a deep sense of insecurity
Mm.
and worry and anxiety and the hole in the soul, and you find alcohol as your self-medication, your relief, your release
Mm-hmm.
from this. Is that
Yeah.
right?
That's absolutely how I see it today. Yeah, it really is. I think, you know, as like anyone, if I'm taken away from alcohol for long enough, the physical need for it or and what have you is taken away. But eventually, it's my thought processes and um, what I, yeah, it's my thought processes that will send me back to a drink. So that's where my recovery has really come in to play, where it's given me a different way of thinking and brought about some really revolutionary changes.
So tell me how it changed you in those early years. Your alcohol use,
Drinking,
your binging. Yeah. How did your binging change you?
in a good way, you mean, or a bad way, or
Well,
both?
both. Tell me both.
Okay, so when I was actually drinking and being social, it changed me in that, I think we all know we lower our inhibitions. I became a lot less introverted, probably a lot more impulsive and spontaneous, which I thought was interesting. But I also have that nature, I guess, a little naturally, so which is probably one of my problems. But now I'll stop and think about consequences. When I was younger, none. Even if I knew that could be quite serious. So it changed me, I think, into just I really honestly thought that I was a more interesting person. A lot of it, you hit the nail on the head before. It was that insecurity of just not really being enough on my own or as is. I'm not like an overly extroverted person, which is, today I know there's nothing wrong with that. But I didn't know that back then. And in fact, I can talk like I'm talking to you today, but when I was younger, I could not. I really couldn't. I didn't have much of a voice at all. I would walk out of social situations. I could have been in a social situation for 2 hours and not said a word, like just being too scared to say anything for fear of, I don't know, saying the wrong thing or whatever. And then I'd walk away just kicking myself. And so it changed that. It really gave me, I used to just like it. I mean, I won't use a swear word, but I just get to the stuff it level. Like when I was 3 or 4 drinks in, I'd just go, stuff it. And that would be comfortable.
Yeah.
So I loved that. And if I could have stopped at 3 or 4 drinks every night, then I probably would, then I'd probably still be doing it. But, I've come to learn it's progressive and for me, it got worse.
Those are the good effects that you experienced because of it. It relieved your inner tension, your anxiety. It made you more spontaneous. When did you start noticing the bad effects of your binging? And what happened?
Okay, so I would notice the bad effects. Somewhere in my early 20s, massive hangovers, like horrendous. I was always taking time off work. I mean, I tried so hard to be a good worker, but Mondays were not ideal for me or for my employer. Like, they really weren't. It's just like,
yes, I don't like Mondays. Who sang that song?
Yeah, I know.
Bob Geldof.
Yeah, that's right. So that they were hard, and as I said, the physical illness or sickness like that I'd have, I would get myself into, I don't know, relationships that I wasn't overly. I just, yeah. How do I put it? I just made really bad choices. I made really bad choices, and I could see that my life was kind of quickly spiraling. I put myself in dangerous situations. I would, because I was often a blackout drinker, especially when I was out and about, I'd wake up on beaches. Like, I did a lot of my drinking, which I hate saying that, but I did a lot of my drinking on the Mornington Peninsula. Like, and there's a big long stretch of beach, like it goes for a long, long time. And I'd wake up the next day thinking, I wonder what suburb I'm in. Like, I wonder what beach this is. But, all jokes aside, it was dangerous. So, I began to have those consequences. And I knew that physically that eventually the game was going to be up. I mean, I knew it was my thinking that wanted to keep drinking, but that my body, there was no way it was going to hold out with that kind of level of drinking, and that did worry me. I did have a bit of a nursing background from a couple of years of uni, and I knew that it wasn't a good idea. And yeah, so when I met my husband in my early 20s, he was probably the first person aside from my mum to say, you really don't drink in a normal fashion. You like when you drink, but something different happens. Oh, and the personality change. Like a lot of drinkers, even if they're heavy drinkers, whatever, my husband can sometimes, have a bit too much or whatever, but his personality doesn't change. And my personality used to change,
In what way?
Sometimes I could get really, really angry, like screaming kind of angry, embarrassingly enough. Like it's, I mean, God forbid I'd ever hear like a recording. It'd just be, ugh. Anyway, this would often be like I'd have no memory of it. I'd wake up the next morning and I'd know that I'd probably not been terrific the night before. But so those sorts of things would happen. I would swear and just be horrendous and basically belittle other people. I think all of the underlying insecurities that I sat with daily, like subconsciously, all of that would come up, and you were gonna hear exactly what I'd been wanting to say for, I don't know, a week, a month, a year, or whatever, and it really wasn't nice. So because I never had this voice, I wanted to talk, or I wanted to say that I'm not okay, or when I was sober, I couldn't, and it would just come out sideways when I was drunk.
So it vented your anger and your inner turmoil.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now
And I think...
Sorry, go on. After you.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that because I always felt so like less than, I wouldn't say it to anyone, but I did have this feeling of just less than, not as good as. So I would, like my husband would say, you tell me I'm this, you tell me I'm that. And I just think, oh my gosh, like all of these things that I actually worry myself about, like throughout the day, I'm calling other people like useless and loser and, stupid and just awful things. And so, I mean, I could see that there must be some sort of psychology behind this, and these underlying layers of just, would come up. But I essentially called him and anyone who was within listening distance, I called them what I thought of myself all day. That makes sense.
But you've mentioned before that it changed your personality, and I've also heard you talk about the chameleon. What does the chameleon mean for you?
Just meaning that I could absolutely become anyone. Well, I thought I could become anyone you either you wanted me to be, or that would suit the situation. So I just, instead of being myself and being able to be different in a situation, I thought that I had to blend and had to, I guess, adjust and fit in. Whereas, today I wouldn't see that so much, but I do remember thinking, I just want to just fit, I don't want to stand out. I don't want to be ignored.
You want to blend in like a chameleon.
Yeah, exactly.
So when did you realize that it was really a problem? What happened to you at that point? When was the first realization that it all was not good in the kingdom of Denmark?
I think I think probably once we'd had our, my husband and I had our first child, which, um, so I was able to stop drinking and stop smoking cigarettes for 2 pregnancies.
Mm.
So once we had our first child, Ella came along in 2007, and I guess I had put a lot of eggs into one basket when it came to my suspected alcoholism, and I really thought that once I had, family, particularly children, uh, and once I had I guess it sounds corny, but a real reason to live, because throughout all of this, by the way, I'd also been at times quite suicidal. So, I
Mm.
also had a mental illness to be dealing with as well. So yeah, I thought that by having children, I'll grow up in terms of my drinking, and I'll want to live for other people. Like I'm going to adore my children enough to absolutely want to be on this planet. There won't be a question, and I won't have to have those thoughts ruminate anymore about is it worth it.
Mm.
So
Right.
that's when I knew. Sorry, so I knew that once I'd had Ella, and when I went back to drinking, and it was actually worse pretty quickly than it had ever been. That's when it was actually to daily, because opportunity knocked, and I'm at home full time, mum, and husband's at work. I'm stressed out of my head because I'm just completely neurotic anyway, and I just would look at the clock and just think, oh my gosh, what time can I have a drink and just
Mm.
de-stress. So yeah, it was after having my first child that I realized that this actually, yeah, hasn't gone away. In fact, it's progressed and got worse. And uh, our solution to that was to get pregnant again, seriously. And I honestly thought that if I just have one more shot at it, like it'll be different this time, and I won't. Um, I'll stop drinking for the 9, 12 months, whatever it is, it ends up taking again, and this time when I go back, I'll be really good.
Mm. So you've alluded to, your mental health issues. I think it's important to highlight that in my experience at least, mental illness is very common. It's very commonly associated with substance use disorders, such as alcoholism. So, what was the relationship between alcohol and your mental health, as far as you could see?
Um, I mean,
And
I'm sure without realizing it. Okay, so I mean, I know today that I'm sort of clinically depressed as opposed to just substance use. You know, I I think I'm not. You would know as a doctor, I suppose, that for some people maybe you take away the substance use, and their mental health improves a lot.
mm,
And if not, and they're not diagnosed with any mental illness, I don't know. But and then some, you take away the substance and there's still, residual like mental illness. And so I am most definitely, I guess, um, depressed, or I'm not today, but if without medication,
mm,
I suffer with depression, and I
mm,
have tried to come off medication a number of times, and I've got all these books, like medication free and recovery medication free and da da da. And I've tried all the natural ways, and I I run, I exercise, I drink heaps, I do everything I can. And the 3 times I've come off my antidepressant, all 3 times I've been in serious trouble. And I didn't, I mean, I've thought about picking up a drink just to escape the depressive thoughts, but more than that, I've just thought about wanting to end it. So,
mm,
I cannot, I've talked to my doctor quite, we've had a really open discussion around the fact that if I ever get this bright idea that I want to come off my medication again, can somebody please intervene? Like, because like, it's really dangerous. Like, I cannot do it. And
uh,
I like, so in terms of how did it interact with alcoholism, I don't know. It certainly wasn't made any better. I'm sure,
mm,
I'm sure those depressive thoughts the next day, like when I was hungover, were made worse by alcohol. But at the same time, you know, from I've said before, I really don't think without alcohol or a substance I would have made it to this age, because at 14 I didn't go into it, but I was self-harming. I wasn't planning on being, like, it's so corny, but I wasn't here for a long time. I was definitely here for a good time, and if I wasn't going to have a good time, I was out of here, and that was so I think alcohol kept me alive for a while.
But it had a downside.
Yeah, in the end, absolutely.
Yeah. And we'll have to talk about that downside in the next episode. Chrissie, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I want to thank you so much for sharing with us your story, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Fergal.
That's it for today's MedHeads. My name's Dr. Fergal Armstrong. We'll see you next time.